Chapter 3. Now. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed," said Clara. "Yeah, sure. No problem, of course. Good night. Sleep well." He didn't think he'd earned the right to tack a term of endearment onto the end. He didn't think he'd endeared himself to her at all yet. He watched Clara climb the stairs slowly, shoulders stooped, weighed down by the hollow exhaustion of grief and uncertainty. The dog waited at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at Clara's retreating figure. It whipped its head round to face Alex in the living room, then back up the stairs, then back to Alex again. "Don't look at me," he said. "I don't know if you're allowed up there." The dog gave out the tiniest of whimpers, and this seemed to snap Clara out of her waking slumber. "Sorry, girl," she said softly, as she padded back down the stairs and scooped the dog up into her arms. "You can sleep on my bed tonight. I don't think she would mind." Alex winced. Her pain was almost palpable. It hung around her shoulders and rippled behind her like a cloak. He went into the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee, opening and closing cupboard doors at random until he found what he needed. Other people's kitchens were always a mystery, defying the logic of the uninitiated. He supposed instant would have to do. No gleaming espresso maker on these kitchen counters. There was a drip filter coffee machine in the corner. It was something he associated more with old-fashioned American diners than quaint English country cottages. It looked out of place next to the brown Betty teapot, although he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Anyhow, he wasn't about to make a whole pot of coffee just for himself. At least the instant was decaf. As the kettle hummed to life, he pulled out his laptop from his bag and opened it up, placing it on the battered square kitchen table, the varnish peeling and blistering from spills left too long, crisscrossed with pen markings and colouring that had bled out over the page when Clara had been little. One half of the tabletop was littered with post and magazines, subscription journals, and flyers advertising events in and around Cambridge over the summer. He flipped open his laptop and pressed the on button to draw it out of standby. A picture of his family at his sister's wedding appeared on screen. It must have been taken about 7 or 8 years ago, and he'd made it his home screen in a flurry of nostalgia a few years back. It was the most recent picture he had of him, his sister, and his parents, all in the same place at the same time, all caught laughing at a shared joke, cheeks flushed with emotion and free-flowing champagne. The kettle had reached a turbulent boil, juddering on the base, and then abruptly clicked off. Alex poured himself a coffee, grimaced as he saw soy milk was the only option in the fridge, and decided to drink it black, sweetened with a little honey he'd found next to the jar of coffee granules. He sat down at the table and pulled up the web page Clara had been so keen to show him earlier. The Cunard Transatlantic Ferry Service on the Queen Mary 2. Alex felt a little sick and shaky even watching the slick marketing video filled with slow-moving panning shots and happy laughing passengers. He had tried to talk his way out of it, arguing that it would take so long to get there. But she had countered that it only took 5 days, and his classes didn't start back for another 3 weeks anyway. She trotted out more reasons to win him round. They wouldn't be so restricted with luggage, so she could take more, which meant he wouldn't have to buy as much for her when they arrived. Clara could stay with Frida for most of the day, so she wouldn't be scared or lonely. Alex was unsure which she, Clara, had meant with this. It was a much more spectacular way to arrive in New York, rather than being herded through the airport like cattle. Alex had argued that Frida might be frightened by the bumpy crossing, and that the Atlantic was notoriously stormy, although he had no idea whether that was actually true. Clara had responded that at least she would be there to comfort her. Once again, Alex's mind flicked between which she would comfort which her. Unlike an aeroplane where she would be all by herself if there was any turbulence. She set her arguments out so logically. Such a serious-minded child, she seemed to Alex. Finally, in a quiet voice, she concluded with the argument that was hardest to rebut. It's what Mum would have wanted, and it's what I want. Alex had promised to think about it, to look at prices and logistics. She hadn't smiled at all or hugged him or thanked him the way most children would if they thought they had finally won over a parent to their way of thinking. She had just nodded and flicked her gaze back down to the floor before closing her laptop, walking into the living room and clicking on the television. How could he tell her, this little girl who had lost everything? How could he tell her that the grown man standing in front of her, who was supposed to take up the slack and make things better, was afraid of boats? Rowing boats, yachts, even big sturdy cruise liners and ferries. He felt seasick even at the prospect, like his stomach was on a spin cycle. He searched and scrolled and scoured the internet for an alternative. He kept coming across forums about transatlantic sea crossings, scoffing at and disbelieving the positive reviews while lapping up the negative accounts with morbid fascination as they stoked his anxiety. He suddenly craved a cigarette, even though he'd only smoked as a teenager, and even then only occasionally and to fit in. He toyed with the idea of buying a few packs to get him through the crossing, though he feared Clara might be horrified. She seemed far too sensible to tolerate a smoker for a parent, and he wasn't sure he could stand the scathing looks he was sure she would send in his direction. The same looks he had seen her mother cast at parties when she saw or suspected people were doing drugs. "Honestly," she would say, "don't they know what the drugs trade does to people in my country?" At moments like that she became fully Colombian, hands gesturing ever more elaborately and passionately. "Oh, they won't buy bananas unless they're fair trade, but they're happy to buy drugs. Never mind the terror and torture. No pity for the poor mullahs who are forced to bring them here." Alex thought back to the utter contempt he had seen etched across Erica's face, in her eyes, Clara's eyes. Alex had scanned his daughter for traces of his own DNA, but she was overwhelmingly her mother's daughter. Perhaps the hair, a touch sandier, a touch straighter, wavy rather than curly. That seemed to be his contribution, a mild, unassuming dilution of Erica Marquez's strong genes. He closed his laptop and walked over to the framed photographs in the hallway. Pictures of Clara as a baby and a toddler, her first school photographs, a closed-mouth smile to hide the gaps, her wavy fringe kinked up in the middle with a cowlick. A few of Erica's parents, one of Erica as a girl with her father in what looked to be Colombia, a too large cowboy hat perched on the back of her head, and what appeared to be a horse parade of some sort in the background. And then some more recent ones. Clara slightly younger but still recognisable as the girl she was now. One of Erica and Clara on a summer's day in a meadow, their bikes tossed carelessly on the grass behind them, the contents of a picnic basket half unpacked. Erica's arms protectively encircling her daughter, squinting happily into the sun. Alex wondered who had taken that photograph. Had there been someone else in her life? He felt a ridiculous pang of jealousy and chided himself for it. It was so strange. She had been his, so utterly and completely, when he had let her. For 2 years. And then she wasn't. And the last cut had been clean and clinical on her part. It had hurt at the time, of course it had. But he'd done all the usual cliched things. Moped, got drunk, bad-mouthed her to his friends, gone out with unsuitable girls on the advice of these same friends, to take his mind off things or make her jealous, which was even more ludicrous, as she was half the world away and wasn't there to witness his glittering new love life. Except that she had found out, somehow. The usual channels, a friend of a friend of a friend who mentioned something in passing, a casually cruel remark, a thoughtless aside, a photo churlishly emailed in a fit of drunken belligerence on his part. Maybe that was why she didn't tell him at first. Alex pondered the what-ifs for a while as he stared at the photographs. Then he rubbed his eyes, pinched the bridge of his nose, and decided it was time to turn in for the night. He washed up his coffee cup and stood it upside down on the draining board, then turned out all the lights downstairs and made his way up to the spare bedroom. He paused in front of Clara's room, her door firmly shut, a narrow strip of light underneath. She was talking quietly, but he couldn't make out what she was saying. Was she on the phone, talking to the dog, or maybe herself? He edged closer to the door, but the floor creaked beneath his feet, and she fell silent. He glanced at the door opposite, Erica's room. The door was open, and he glimpsed the rumpled covers of an unmade bed, a corner bookshelf stocked to the brim, books piled on top, and even leaning up against the wall. He felt like an intruder, even in the guest bedroom. He hadn't been invited to stay, not really. A letter from a solicitor, another from Erica, unofficial but unmistakable. A handwritten letter tucked in with the paperwork of her official typed will, signed and stamped in the offices of Wilson and Petherbridge solicitors. He closed the door to her room. It was too intimate, too personal, and he no longer had the right to see the behind-closed-doors side of her. He got ready for bed slowly, drained but curious still. In the bathroom, as he brushed his teeth, he took in all the things that had been hers. A hairbrush with several of the prongs missing, tendrils of hair strangling the rest. A bottle of perfume from a brand he didn't recognise. He lifted it to his face and inhaled the scent clinging to the nozzle. It was spicy, almost masculine. It wasn't the same perfume she'd worn as a younger woman, so sweet and heady it had sometimes made his sinuses ache on those early dates. Jars and glass bottles of oils and creams clinked together as he gathered them to one side to make room for his wash bag, which sat there like an untidy interloper, sagging and a little stained. More evidence of his intrusion. He washed his face with a bar of translucent soap that smelled like strawberries and smoothed his hair back from his face with the water. Puffing out a sigh, he collected his wash bag, tucked it under his arm, and rearranged the bottles and jars to cover the traces of his presence. He didn't want Clara to think he'd been disrespectful of her mother's things. Sleep came in snatches, despite his bone-gnawing weariness. It was cooler in the north-facing guest bedroom than in the rest of the house, and he'd forgotten that even in summer, England's temperature could drop by so much at night. He awoke feeling chilled and pulled the quilt up over his shoulders so only his head was peeking out. But even so, the occasional shiver would send shock waves through his body. He wondered dully if he might be coming down with something. Eventually, at 5:30, he gave up trying to sleep at all. It was light outside, and the flight over had thrown his body clock into disarray anyhow. He got up and pulled on a pair of jeans and a faded NYU sweatshirt, then smoothed back the bed covers at the foot of the bed so the sheets could air out. As he emerged from his room, he could see Clara's door was open and heard the muffled sounds of someone downstairs moving around in the kitchen, the gentle hush of a tap being turned on, and the quiet chink of metal on metal, a spoon being placed in the sink, perhaps. He made a show of clearing his throat as he came down the stairs, humming to himself, being a little heavy-footed so his sudden appearance in the kitchen wouldn't alarm her. As he reached the downstairs landing, the little grey and white dog padded over to him, looked up, and gave 2 staccato barks in his direction. Alex was unsure what this meant, but it felt like a greeting. The dog gave a couple of cursory wags of its stubby tail, so Alex bent down to scratch between its ears. "Morning, Frida," he said. "Hope you slept well." "As well as can be expected," Clara replied, appearing in the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of tea in both hands. She was unsettled. She normally sleeps in the hallway between mine and Mum's room. I think she was looking for Mum. It's hard for her to understand. Clara's gaze was turned downward, brow furrowed as she looked at Frida. "It must be hard for you to understand as well," replied Alex. "Yes, well," she started, then swallowed hard. She continued to stare at her dog, who was looking between the two of them as they spoke, as if following their conversation. Clara sniffed and said, "I'm going to walk Frida before it gets too hot," though she didn't make a move in any direction, just nodded several times, agreeing with her decision. "I'll come with you." Alex didn't like the idea of a young girl out by herself at this time in the morning, even if it was light outside. "Oh, no need," she replied. "I'm not going far. There's a field just round the corner. I take Frida there every day. Still, I'd like to come. It looks like it's a beautiful morning, and my body seems to be done with sleeping, or not sleeping, for the time being anyway." He smiled at her, and she nodded several times again, seemingly to herself. "Come on, girl, let's go." "Oh, what about your tea? Aren't you going to finish it first? I know I could use a cup of coffee." Clara looked down at the steaming cup in her hands as if seeing it for the first time. She turned and walked back into the kitchen, Alex and Frida following, then opened a cupboard door and pulled out 2 travel mugs, handing one to Alex and carefully decanting her tea into the other. "Here," she said, "for your coffee." As Alex quickly prepared himself another cup of instant coffee, he remembered there was only soy milk in the fridge. "Do you guys not drink, like, regular milk, then?" He realised he sounded like his students. When did that all-pervasive like start creeping into his sentences? Clara frowned at such a seemingly out-of-the-blue question. Alex pointed towards the fridge. "I could only find soy." "Oh, we must have run out. I'll get some later when the shop opens." Clara pulled on a hoodie that was hanging up with the dog's lead over the banister, clipped the lead onto Frida's collar, and looped it around her left wrist before picking up her mug of tea. Seeing her 2 hands occupied, Clara said, "Sorry, would you mind opening the door? Those are the keys there." She nodded at a hook on the wall. "Sure," replied Alex, glad to be useful at least, even if his company wasn't really wanted. Clara was still wearing pyjamas, but still she jimmied her bare feet into a pair of battered trainers lying in the hallway. Alex quickly laced up his own trainers, which he had left by the foot of the stairs. It was clear that Clara wouldn't wait around for him. As he closed the door behind them and fumbled with unknown keys and locks, Clara strode ahead with Frida trotting neatly beside, nails clicking on the pavement. Alex had to jog a little to catch up as they rounded the corner, trying not to spill his coffee, which he had overfilled. Up ahead, at the end of a dead-end road, was a gate to a field with a wildflower meadow, a path neatly mown into the long grasses around the perimeter fence. They walked in silence for a while, Frida sniffing here and there, but mostly keeping close to Clara's heels. "Wow, it's beautiful here, so peaceful," Alex ventured. "You must really love living here." He immediately regretted his choice of conversation starter. He was about to pull her away from all of this and take her far from everything she knew. "Yes," she replied simply, staring off into the distance and sipping her tea. "It must be very different where you live. Very noisy and busy, I suppose. Mum takes me into Cambridge sometimes, but we're mostly here in the village. I've never lived in a big city before," she added softly. Realising her confusion, he wanted to reassure her. "Oh, but I don't live in New York City. I live upstate, just away outside of a small town. Not so different from here, really. You'll love it, I hope," he added. "Oh, I just assumed. Mum said you met in New York City and that you stayed after she came back." "Oh, we did meet in the city, but a few years after your mother left, I got a job in a school a couple of hours from there, further up north." "I see." Alex could see she was framing a question in her mind and decided to give her the space to ask it. He'd seen that look so many times on his students' faces, plucking up the courage to ask or say something out loud. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Tell me what it was like when you first went over to New York," she said, adding more quietly, "when you first met her." It was the first time she'd taken an interest in him, although of course he knew it wasn't him she was interested in.